Admiral Keth Moore prided himself on his strategic brilliance. 3 decades commanding the hegemony's finest battleships, countless victories against inferior species, and now this. The ultimate prize dangling before his compound eyes like ripe fruit waiting to be plucked. "Sir, the human transport vessel has been successfully boarded," reported Captain Vel-9, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. "Minimal resistance. They're civilians, mostly." Keth Moore's thorax vibrated with what humans might recognize as laughter. "Civilians. How delightfully predictable. What's our cargo manifest? Approximately 400 passengers, Admiral. Standard refugee transport fleeing the Terran border conflicts. However," Vel-9 paused, consulting his data tablet, "we have identified something particularly valuable." The Admiral's primary eyes narrowed, while his secondary pair focused on the tactical display. "Elaborate. 63 juveniles, sir. Human children between the ages of 5 and 15 standard years. The intelligence networks will pay handsomely for such specimens. Live human young are extraordinarily rare in our markets." Keth Moore felt his confidence surge. Human children were indeed valuable. The various research facilities, entertainment complexes, and private collectors throughout hegemony space would bid astronomical amounts for such prizes. These weren't just any humans either. These were the offspring of families wealthy enough to afford passage on legitimate transport vessels, not the desperate rabble who usually fell into hegemony nets. "Excellent work, Captain. Separate them immediately. Standard containment protocols for the adults, but those children? They require special handling. Climate-controlled environments, adequate nutrition, medical monitoring. Damaged goods fetch significantly lower prices." What Admiral Keth Moore didn't know, couldn't possibly have anticipated, was that 3 sectors away, Colonel Marcus Webb was reviewing routine patrol reports when the words jumped off his tactical display like a physical blow. "Transport vessel Meridian Dawn, registry Hotel 7794, reported overdue at checkpoint Delta Prime. Last known position, neutral zone boundary marker Tango 6. Webb's coffee mug hit his desk with enough force to crack the ceramic. Meridian Dawn. He knew that ship. More importantly, he knew who was aboard that ship. His daughter Lucy. His 8-year-old daughter with her mother's bright green eyes and stubborn streak a mile wide. The divorce had been messy, sure, but Karen had every right to relocate to the outer colonies. What she didn't have was the right to vanish in a thin air-along with his little girl. "Sergeant Martinez." Webb's voice carried across the command center with the authority of a man who'd spent 15 years turning raw recruits into instruments of controlled violence. "Sir, I need everything we have on hegemony raider activity in sectors 7 through 12. Current intelligence, movement patterns, known operating areas. I need it 10 minutes ago." Martinez, a career soldier who'd learned not to question that particular tone in his commanding officer's voice, simply nodded. "On it, sir." Meanwhile, aboard the hegemony vessel Claw of Dominion, Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the reinforced barrier separating her from the ship's detention bay. The sight that greeted her made her stomach clench with a mixture of fury and helplessness that threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. Human children, dozens of them, huddled together in a space barely large enough for half their number, their faces streaked with tears and confusion. Some of the older ones were trying to comfort the younger ones, creating a heartbreaking tableau of innocence, trying to make sense of a universe that had suddenly revealed its cruelest face. "Mama, when are we going home?" The voice belonged to a girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old, her small hand clutched desperately in that of an older boy who was clearly trying very hard not to cry himself. Elena had been traveling aboard the Meridian Dawn as part of a medical relief mission to the outer colonies. 30 years as a pediatric surgeon had prepared her for many things, but watching children being processed like cargo by alien raiders wasn't among them. "Dr. Vasquez." The voice behind her carried the unmistakable accent of someone from the inner systems. She turned to find a man in his 40s, still wearing the torn remnants of what had once been an expensive business suit. "James Morrison, Colonial Development Corporation." I don't suppose you have any idea what they intend to do with us." Elena's expression hardened. She'd dealt with corporate types before, usually when their cost-cutting measures had resulted in injured workers ending up in her emergency room. "Nothing good, Mr. Morrison. These aren't explorers or diplomats. They are slavers." Morrison's face went pale. "Slavers? But surely there must be some sort of legal framework, some diplomatic protocol. Look around you." Elena gestured toward the children. "Do you see any diplomacy here? These creatures just committed an act of war against the human species. They took children." What Elena couldn't see, what none of the human prisoners could possibly know, was that their capture had already triggered a response that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan had been enjoying what passed for shore leave on Outpost Gamma 7 when the priority transmission arrived. 3 days of actual hot meals, real showers, and sleeping in a bed that didn't vibrate with engine harmonics had almost made him forget that he was technically listed as a deserter by Human Defense Command. The message was coded, but Jake had been running Black Ops long enough to recognize a recall when he saw one. More interesting was the source. Colonel Webb wasn't supposed to know how to contact Sullivan's mercenary unit, the Devil Dogs. Officially, Jake Sullivan and his team didn't exist. "Boss, you're going to want to see this." Corporal Tommy Nash looked up from his communication console, his usually jovial expression replaced by something considerably darker. "It's about kids." Jake's blood ran cold. In his experience, when Tommy Nash got that particular look on his face, it meant someone was about to die. Probably a lot of someone's. "Talk to me." Hegemony raiders hit a civilian transport, Meridian Dawn, carrying refugees from the border conflicts. 400 passengers, including 63 children between 5 and 15 years old. The silence in the Devil Dogs' temporary headquarters stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Jake's team had seen action across 17 different systems, fought everything from robot uprisings to territorial disputes between rival corporations. They'd taken jobs that regular military units couldn't touch, handled situations that officially never happened. But children were different. Children were the line that didn't get crossed. How long ago? Jake's voice carried the kind of quiet intensity that his team had learned to associate with imminent and spectacular violence. 18 hours. But boss, there's more. The transmission came from Colonel Webb, Human Defense Command. His daughter was on that ship. Jake's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Something cold and calculating and absolutely merciless. "Give me everything we have on hegemony slaving operations. Ship configurations, crew complements, standard operating procedures." And Tommy, "Yeah, boss," sent a message to the colonel. "Tell him the Devil Dogs are officially back in business. Back aboard the Claw of Dominion." Admiral Keth Moore was reviewing profit projections when his communications officer requested permission to speak. "Admiral, we are receiving multiple priority transmissions from Hegemony Intelligence. They are requesting immediate confirmation of our cargo manifest." Keth Moore's good mood evaporated like morning mist. Hegemony Intelligence didn't make casual inquiries, especially not about cargo manifests. "What's the nature of their inquiry, Lieutenant?" "Sir, they're specifically asking about human juveniles. They want to know exact numbers, ages, and current condition." The Admiral's compound eyes fixed on his subordinate with an intensity that made the younger officers kite and rattle. "And why, exactly, would intelligence have advanced knowledge of our cargo?" Before the communications officer could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Not the standard alert tones that indicated routine emergencies, but the deep, bone-shaking wail that meant only one thing: incoming hostiles. "Report." Keth Moore's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Sir, we are detecting multiple vessels approaching at high velocity. Configuration unknown, but they are not broadcasting any identification codes." "How many ships?" That's the problem, sir. We're not sure. They're using some kind of stealth technology we haven't encountered before. Sensors are picking up drive signatures, but we can't get a visual confirmation." Admiral Keth Moore had spent 3 decades in command of hegemony vessels, and he'd learned to trust his instincts. Right now, Those instincts were screaming that he'd made a terrible mistake. All stations, combat alert. Bring defensive systems online and prepare for possible boarding action. He paused, his tactical mind racing through possibilities. And Lieutenant, send an immediate transmission to Hegemony Command. Tell them we may have encountered human military assets. What Keth Moore didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have anticipated, was that his message would never reach its intended recipients. The moment his communications array powered up to transmit, it encountered something that shouldn't have existed, a human electronic warfare suite. Technical Sergeant Lisa Park had been monitoring Hegemony Communications traffic for the better part of 6 months, part of a classified program that officially didn't exist and unofficially was staffed by people who had never officially served in the human military. When the priority transmission from the Claw of Dominion hit her intercept grid, Lisa almost choked on her coffee. "Holy shit," she whispered, then immediately reached for her secure communication link. "Control, this is Raven 7. I need an immediate priority connection to Colonel Webb, Human Defense Command." "Raven 7, Control. Confirm your traffic priority." "Control, this is Flash Override priority." "I repeat, Flash Override. Patch me through to Webb immediately." The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds, which in military communication terms was approximately 3 seconds too long. "Raven 7, you are connected. Colonel Webb, this is Technical Sergeant Park, Electronic Warfare Division." "Sir, I have intelligence on your daughter's location." The response was immediate and carried the kind of intensity that made Lisa grateful they weren't speaking face to face. "Talk." "Sir, I have intercepted communications from a Hegemony vessel, designation Claw of Dominion. They are currently holding human prisoners, including children matching the age demographics from the Meridian Dawn passenger manifest. Current position is approximately 14 light minutes from the neutral zone boundary. Sergeant Park, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Can you maintain communication intercept on that vessel?" "Yes, sir. I could do better than that. I could disrupt their communications entirely if you need me to." "Do it. And Sergeant, if anyone asks, this conversation never happened." Lisa Park smiled grimly as she began initializing her electronic warfare protocols. She'd been waiting for an opportunity to test her systems against hegemony technology. IT was about to be a very bad day to be Admiral Keth Moore. The first indication that something had gone seriously wrong came when the Claw of Dominion's primary communication array simply stopped working. Not damaged, not malfunctioning, but completely silent, as if someone had reached across space and flipped a switch. The second indication was considerably more dramatic. "Admiral," the tactical officer's voice carried a note of panic that Keth Moore had never heard from a veteran crew member. "Sir, we have multiple contacts closing on our position. They're not appearing on long-range sensors, but short-range proximity alarms are going insane." "How is that possible?" Keth Moore demanded, his confidence finally beginning to crack. "No known technology could defeat our sensor arrays at close range." "Sir, I don't think this is known technology." As if summoned by the tactical officer's words, the main display flickered to life, showing the space surrounding their vessel. What Admiral Keth Moore saw there made his primary heart skip several beats. Ships. Human ships. But not like any human vessels in the Hegemony's intelligence databases. These craft were sleek, predatory things that seemed to bend light around their hulls. Worse, they were close. Impossibly close. Close enough that their weapon systems were already trained on the Claw of Dominion. "This is Colonel Marcus Webb, Human Defense Command, to the Hegemony Vessel Claw of Dominion." The voice that filled the ship's bridge carried the kind of authority that transcended species barriers. "You are currently in possession of stolen human civilians, including children. You have 30 seconds to prepare for boarding, or we will assume hostile intent and respond accordingly." Admiral Keth Moore's compound eyes darted between his tactical display and his communications console. "Can we establish contact?" "Negative, sir. Something is jamming our entire communications grid." "Weapons? Online, sir, but..." The tactical officer hesitated. "Admiral, I'm reading energy signatures from those human vessels that don't match anything in our databases." Their weapons output appears to be significantly higher than standard human military specifications. Kethmore felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 decades of military service. Fear, not concern or tactical uncertainty, but genuine, primal fear. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "we are receiving another transmission. This is your 15-second warning." Colonel Webb's voice filled the bridge again. "Surrender now, or face the consequences." Admiral Kethmore had exactly 10 seconds to make the most important decision of his life. He could surrender, face the shame of capture and the likely end of his military career. Or he could fight, pit his veteran crew and proven vessel against these mysterious human ships that he chose poorly. All weapons, open fire. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for the next century, assuming any hegemony academies survived what was about to unfold. The Claw of Dominion's plasma cannons erupted in a brilliant display of destructive energy, their targeting systems locked onto the nearest human vessel. For exactly 2.3 seconds, Admiral Kethmore felt vindicated in his decision. Then the human ships fired back. The difference wasn't just in firepower, though the energy readings that flooded the Claw of Dominion sensors were beyond anything in hegemony databases. The difference was in precision. Where Kethmore's weapons had fired in broad, sweeping arcs designed to maximize damage to multiple targets, the human response was surgical. Every shot found its mark. Not random marks, but specific, carefully chosen targets. The Claw of Dominion's weapon arrays simply ceased to exist, vaporized with the kind of accuracy that suggested the humans had been studying hegemony ship designs for considerably longer than anyone had realized. Damage report. Kethmore's voice cracked with the strain of watching his tactical superiority evaporate in real time. "Sir, all primary weapons offline. Secondary batteries offline. Point defense systems offline. They didn't just disable our weapons, Admiral. They surgically removed them." Captain Velnine's mandibles were clicking rapidly, a sign of severe stress in a species. "Sir, they could have destroyed us. Instead, they specifically targeted our ability to fight back while leaving life support and structural integrity intact." The implications hit Kethmore like a physical blow. These humans weren't just militarily superior. They were demonstrating tactical control that bordered on contempt. They weren't destroying his ship because they didn't need to. They were keeping him alive for a reason. "Admiral," the communications officer reported, his voice barely above a whisper, "we are receiving another transmission." Colonel Webb's voice filled the bridge again, but now there was something different in his tone. Something that made every hegemony officer present suddenly very aware of their own mortality. "Admiral Kethmore, this is your final warning. You have fired upon vessels carrying rescue personnel, attempting to recover stolen human civilians. Under the Terran defense protocols, you have just declared war on the human species. Surrender immediately, or we will demonstrate why that was an exceptionally poor decision." Kethmore's compound eyes darted to his tactical display. 6 human vessels surrounded his ship, their weapons trained with mechanical precision on vital systems. But it was what he couldn't see that terrified him most. His sensors were picking up energy signatures that suggested additional vessels just outside his detection range. How many ships had the humans brought? The answer, as it turned out, was considerably more than Admiral Kethmore could have imagined. "This is Lieutenant Commander Sullivan to all Devil Dogs units. Target is confirmed hostile. Children are aboard, so precision is paramount. I want surgical strikes only. Anyone who damages a bulkhead containing human prisoners will answer to me personally." Jake Sullivan's voice carried across the tactical network, linking not just his mercenary unit, but 3 additional human military groups that officially didn't exist. The Ghost Battalion, remnants of units that had been declared destroyed during border conflicts but had actually gone deep black. The Iron Wolves, a pack of former Human Defense Command officers who specialized in operations that regular military couldn't touch. And most terrifyingly, the Night Hunters, psychological warfare specialists whose methods were classified at levels that required approval from the highest echelons of human government. "Sullivan, this is Captain Rodriguez, Ghost Battalion. We have visual confirmation on the detention areas. 63 human children, multiple adult civilians. They're being held in substandard conditions. Jake's expression hardened. Defined substandard, Captain. Overcrowded, inadequate life support, no medical facilities. Some of the younger children appear to be showing signs of dehydration and stress-related trauma. The silence on the tactical network lasted exactly long enough for every human commander to process what they'd just heard. When Jake Sullivan spoke again, his voice carried a quality that made veteran soldiers check their weapons. All units, new parameters. These aren't just hostiles anymore. They're child abusers. Gloves are off. Aboard the Claw of Dominion, Dr. Elena Vasquez was pressed against the barrier, separating her from the children when the first impact shook the ship. The sound wasn't the devastating explosion she'd expected, but something more controlled, more precise. What's happening? James Morrison grabbed her arm, his corporate composure finally cracking completely. Someone's coming for us, Elena replied, watching as several of the older children moved protectively around the younger ones. And I don't think they are hegemony. The lights flickered. Emergency power systems engaging as primary power was systematically disrupted. But again, it wasn't random damage. Life support remained stable, gravity maintained normal levels, and the temperature stayed within acceptable ranges. Someone was being very careful not to harm the prisoners. Dr. Vasquez. The voice belonged to Lucy Webb, Colonel Webb's 8-year-old daughter. Elena had recognized her from the passenger manifest and had been keeping a protective eye on the girl since their capture. Is my daddy coming? Elena knelt down to Lucy's level, choosing her words carefully. Sweetheart, there are people coming to help us. Good people. What Elena couldn't say, what she couldn't possibly explain to an 8-year-old, was that the vibrations running through the ship's hull suggested that Lucy's father had brought friends. Lots of friends. Friends with very advanced weapons and apparently unlimited patience for precision work. The boarding pods attached to the Claw of Dominion's hull with a kind of gentle precision that spoke of extensive practice. Admiral Keth Moore watched on his tactical display as 12 separate breach points were established simultaneously, each one carefully positioned to avoid any area containing human prisoners. Sir, Captain Velnine reported, his voice hollow with defeat. They're using some kind of molecular disintegration technology to cut through our hull. Our blast doors are useless. How long until they reach the bridge? At their current rate of progress? Approximately 4 minutes, Admiral. Kethmore's primary hearts were racing as he considered his options. He could try to use the human prisoners as leverage, threaten to harm them unless the attackers withdrew. It was a time-honored tactic in hegemony military doctrine. Something told him that threatening human children would be the last mistake he ever made. The first human soldier to appear on the Claw of Dominion's bridge moved with the fluid grace of a predator that had spent years perfecting the art of violence. Colonel Marcus Webb wore the kind of combat armor that suggested human military technology had advanced considerably beyond what hegemony intelligence believed possible. Admiral Kethmore. Webb's voice carried the same authority that had filled the ship's communication system, but now it was accompanied by the very physical presence of someone who had clearly killed before and was prepared to do so again. You have something that belongs to me. Kethmore's compound eyes fixed on the human officer, taking in details that made his tactical mind race. The armor was clearly advanced, but it was the weapons that caught his attention. Not the standard plasma rifles that hegemony intelligence attributed to human forces, but something sleeker, something that hummed with contained energy. Colonel Webb, I presume, Kethmore managed, forcing his voice to remain steady. I am prepared to negotiate the return of your people. Webb's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes that made every hegemony officer on the bridge suddenly very aware that they were in the presence of someone who had moved beyond normal military protocols. Negotiate. Webb's voice carried a note of what might have been amusement if it weren't so clearly dangerous. Admiral, you seem to be under the impression that you have something to bargain with. Colonel, I have 400 human prisoners, including 63 children. Surely their safety is worth some consideration. What happened next would be replayed in hegemony strategic planning sessions for decades, assuming any hegemony strategic planners survive the next few minutes. Webb smiled. I could tell wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the kind of smile that predators wore when they realized their prey had just walked into a perfectly prepared trap. Admiral, let me explain something about human psychology that apparently didn't make it into your intelligence files. When you capture our civilians, we get angry. When you capture our children, we stop following the rules. As if summoned by Webb's words, additional human soldiers began appearing on the bridge, not through the main entrances, but through what appeared to be solid bulkheads. The hegemony crew watched in fascination and horror as sections of their own ship's structure simply dissolved, allowing armed humans to step through gaps that sealed themselves moments later. Molecular manipulation technology, Webb explained conversationally, as if he were discussing the weather instead of demonstrating military capabilities that shouldn't have existed. We have been working on it for a few years now. Turns out it's very useful for situations exactly like this one. Admiral Kethmore's tactical mind finally grasped the true scope of what was happening. These weren't just advanced human military units. They were demonstrating technology that was decades ahead of anything in hegemony arsenals. The question that terrified him most was simple. If humans possessed such capabilities, why had they been losing border conflicts? The answer, when it came, was delivered by Technical Sergeant Lisa Park's voice through Webb's communication system. Colonel, we have successfully extracted all human prisoners. Medical teams are providing immediate care to the children. Preliminary assessment indicates mild dehydration and psychological trauma, but no permanent physical harm. Webb nodded, never taking his eyes off Admiral Kethmore. Excellent work, Sergeant. Now, Admiral, we come to the interesting part of our conversation. Colonel Webb, surely we can reach some kind of arrangement. The hegemony is not without resources, and we could provide substantial compensation for any misunderstanding. Webb's smile widened, becoming something that would have given nightmares to apex predators. Misunderstanding? Admiral, you captured human children and sold them into slavery. There's no misunderstanding here. There's only consequences. What Admiral Kethmore couldn't know, what no hegemony intelligence service had ever suspected, was that humanity's apparent weakness in border conflicts had been entirely deliberate. Every loss, every tactical withdrawal, every surrendered colony had been part of a carefully orchestrated deception designed to make potential enemies underestimate human capabilities. The species that had once fought wars with chemical explosives and kinetic projectiles had spent the last 50 years developing weapons that operated on principles most galactic civilizations considered theoretical impossibilities. Colonel, Lieutenant Commander Sullivan's voice crackled through Webb's communication system. All children have been successfully extracted and are receiving medical attention. Dr. Vasquez is coordinating care with our medical teams. Status on adult prisoners. All accounted for and safe, sir. However, we have a situation you need to be aware of. Webb's expression hardened. Report. Sir, preliminary interrogation of captured hegemony crew members indicates this wasn't an isolated incident. We are looking at a systematic operation targeting human civilian transports, specifically those carrying children. The silence on the Claw of Dominion's bridge stretched long enough to become physically uncomfortable. When Webb spoke again, his voice carried a quality that made Admiral Kethmore's exoskeleton begin to crack under stress. Admiral, it appears that you and your species have been engaged in organized child trafficking targeting human civilians. Is that an accurate assessment? Kethmore's compound eyes darted between the human soldiers surrounding him, looking for any sign of weakness or opportunity for escape. What he saw instead were professionals who had clearly moved beyond normal military protocols into something considerably more personal. Colonel Webb, I am merely a military officer following orders. The broader policies of the hegemony are not my responsibility. That's unfortunate, Admiral, because those broader policies have just become your personal problem. What happened next would be transmitted throughout hegemony space as a warning to any other species considering similar operations against human civilians. Webb activated his communication system, broadcasting on frequencies that would reach every hegemony vessel within 12 light years. This is Colonel Marcus Webb, Human Defense Command, broadcasting to all hegemony forces. Your species is engaged in systematic kidnapping and trafficking of human children. This constitutes an act of war against humanity. You have 72 hours to return all human prisoners currently held in hegemony space and provide full documentation of your slaving operations. Failure to comply will result in total war. Admiral Kethmore's primary hearts stopped beating for several seconds. Colonel, surely you realize that the hegemony fleet outnumbers human forces by a factor of at least 20 to 1. Webb's smile returned, and this time it was accompanied by something that made the ship's lighting seem dimmer. Admiral, let me share a little secret with you. Those border conflicts where humanity appeared to be losing, we were testing your capabilities while hiding our own. Every engagement was carefully designed to gather intelligence while concealing the true extent of human military development. As if to punctuate his words, the ship's main display activated, showing the space surrounding the Claw of Dominion. What Admiral Kethmore saw there made his compound eyes widen in terror. Ships, hundreds of them. Human vessels that appeared to bend space around themselves, their hulls barely visible against the star field. Not the small patrol craft that hegemony intelligence attributed to human forces, but massive capital ships that dwarfed anything in the hegemony fleet. Admiral, meet the Terran Defense Fleet. Approximately 400 vessels, each one carrying weapons that operate on principles your species hasn't discovered yet. They have been waiting just outside your sensor range for the last 6 hours. Kethmore's tactical mind raced through the implications. 400 ships, here, now, demonstrating capabilities that made hegemony technology look primitive by comparison. How, he whispered. Admiral, humanity learned a long time ago that the most dangerous predator is the one that appears harmless until it's too late. We have spent 50 years convincing the galaxy that we are weak, primitive, and easily defeated. Congratulations. You just discovered how wrong that assessment was. Webb gestured to his soldiers, who began efficiently restraining the hegemony crew. Admiral Kethmore, you and your crew are hereby prisoners of war. You will be transported to a human detention facility where you will remain until your government meets our demands for the return of all human prisoners and reparations for war crimes. And if the hegemony refuses? Webb's expression became something that would haunt Kethmore's nightmares for the rest of his considerably shortened life. Then you will have a front row seat to watch us demonstrate why capturing human children was the worst mistake your species ever made. As the Claw of Dominion was taken under tow by human vessels, Admiral Kethmore realized that he had just participated in the opening act of what would likely be the shortest war in galactic history. IN detention centers across hegemony space. Human children began to disappear as their captors suddenly developed an urgent desire to return them to human space before anyone noticed they had been missing. The message had been received, understood, and taken very seriously indeed. Humanity had just announced that it was no longer interested in playing the role of galactic victim. And for those species foolish enough to target human children, the consequences would be swift, terrible, and absolutely final. The age of human weakness was over. The age of human vengeance had begun.